Uh, we shall start the session, afternoon session, post-lunch, on challenges of non-traditional threats. And, well, it's very difficult for me to tell you what is a non-traditional threat because a threat remains a threat, whatever format. So therefore, I shall not get into that. I'll leave it to the scholars and the specialists to touch on the issues of non-traditional threats, challenges in non-traditional threats in Central Asia or vis-a-vis India-Central Asia relations. Okay, and will you start the session, sir? Or Mr. Narayana?
Yes. Okay, let me try to give a perspective on what I think is non-traditional.
So I invite Professor Madhavan Narayanan to go ahead and present his point of view. Thank you, sir. Please.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And I have to begin with several disclaimers. First of all, I'm not a professor. Amid all the scholars and academicians, I'm a journalist. So what I bring to the table, if at all, is not conventional expertise, but non-conventional expertise on non-conventional threats. So because journalism makes us interdisciplinary, makes us more practical. I've covered the Kargil War, I've covered diplomacy, I've covered internal elections, and I've covered technology. And I'm a journalist who has dealt with information and data in various forms, including information technology. And to that extent, I understand that we live in an age of cybersecurity and information wars of a new kind. And that is what is likely to be my focus. But when I was thinking about it, okay, let me put my second disclaimer, because that when you speak after lunch, I hope I wake you up. And not. And the third disclaimer is that I missed the morning session, so I hope I'm not repeating some of the stuff that is already said and actually bringing something new. Now, let me begin by I took some quick notes because I was in a short notice here. So let me first give a big picture, because I've been allowed the privilege of being the first speaker, so I can make it more like a mini keynote. Basically, I look at 4 Ps even in conventional, non-conventional threats, which is the perspective on where things are, the principles, what are we doing this for and why, and policy, as in what should be the policy of dealing with non-conventional threats based on the principles that we espouse. And fourth is, of course, practice on how we actually do these things. So one of the most interesting things that first of all, I'm not even comfortable with the word threat in a seminar where I have friends from Central Asia, because we always viewed Central Asia as a very friendly zone for India. So it's very difficult to imagine a threat scenario where with people with whom you've never had any kind of negative emotions. We are also living in the age of democracy and hopefully better human welfare. And therefore, I often wonder whether we should put threat as a target of our uh, uh, discussion, because the more you think of threat, the more threatened you feel. So some of these issues are psychological, because non-conventional threats have a very strong psychological and information perspectives that need to be kept in mind. But that is a general, a mulling on the situation. The perspective is that conventionally, a war or a threat used to be territorial. Now we are living in an age of what I call non-territorial threats. Therefore, the first thing that we need to remember is that you're no longer defending a territory. Traditionally, you defended a territory. That still happens, as you know, it's happening in Ukraine right now. But territory is not just about borders as it used to be. Let us go back 150 years and you will find that the aeroplane had not been invented. So when aircraft happened and the First World War saw the Zeppelins, and therefore uh, Air Force was at that time 100 years, 115 years to go to be precise. The Air Force was a non-conventional, non-traditional threat. So at that time, we viewed Air Force in a certain perspective. And by the Second World War, Hitler used the Luftwaffe and Blitzkrieg and whatnot, and suddenly Air Force became mainstream to a certain kind of warfare and a certain kind of threat emanating from it. So today, sitting in 2023, we have to imagine what is it today that is like Air Force was 115 years ago. And today, that thing is information and cyber related non-conventional threats. There is also another non-conventional threat, which is also physical in nature, but like old threats, but it is what I think our own General Naravne called it, or quoting a scholar called Andrew Krevinsky or something, I forget the name, he called it the democratization of destruction. Democratization of destruction means this. When I was covering the Kargil war in 1999, I met a man whose leg had been blown up by a landmine. Now, interestingly, the 1965 and 71 wars with Pakistan had resulted in a situation where landmines that went back 25, 30, 40 years were still lying near the jungles and the forests. So a civilian poor peasant going there got blown up. Now, at the same time, I was also the chief technology correspondent in Reuters, and I found something very interesting that a company called NIT was demonstrating for me a remote controlled robo. A robo could move and go into a territory because there is no human being involved, there is no threat to human life. So today, then I was thinking that if there is a landmine and there's a human being is replaced by a robo, then the defense changes dramatically. And so new technology enables both in offense and in defense unconventional ways of both use of technology. So one important principle to remember is that technology is intent neutral, which means like nuclear technology or information technology, it can be used both ways. Whoever has it and whoever masters it can use it in a different way. And therefore, both in defense and offense, you have to be on top of technological trends. Today, if you want to name those technologies, they are robotics, drones, artificial intelligence. All three are being discussed as we speak in so many ways. Some of the last week, Elon Musk said that there should be a 6-month moratorium on new research in artificial intelligence because today you can create images and even fake videos that seem real so that it can create disinformation. And disinformation, rumors, and misleading perceptions are a very serious form of non-conventional threat to security. Now, the thing is that this non-conventional threat has, as I said, both physical and psychological dimensions. Let me speak about the physical dimension. Physical dimension is where it happened with India recently. A small drone as small as this can carry a bomb and be dropped somewhere uh, without easily being detected by an aircraft. So that is a physical form of non-conventional threat. The psychological form is where you can have fake videos or social media disinformation that creates unrest about people. I missed your session, but if you're looking at India and you look at the Islamic world, there is a tendency to have a simplistic view of the Islamic world. It is very rich, very diverse. It has great achievements, but if you have stereotyping as a problem, that is, to me, an unconventional threat. So that brings me to a very interesting aspect of non-territorial threat, which is that the difference between external, internal, and internal threat, the security have blurred because of the non-conventional threat. Therefore, that brings me to a key principle of this. What am I defending? If you look at what happened in 26/11 attacks in Mumbai, earlier we used to think that wars happen only in borders. Today, you have non-border warfare. And similarly, satellite phones were used to spread stories about India. Both the Kargil war and the 26/11 involved the use of satellite phones. And today you have hackers attacking computer systems owned by governments. So you need ethical hackers, you need a cyber security in which physically you have to protect information systems. The software systems have to be protected through appropriate defense, which may not be physical computers, but otherwise. Then the third layer of threat involves disinformation, videos, or stories, or rumors, or hearsay, or exaggeration, or hyperbole that creates psychological impressions of fear and paranoia among even friendly people. It can create threat situations and perceptions. It can lead to exaggeration of threats which invite counter actions that actually becomes a negative self-fulfilling prophecies. So you need to have a full mindset where it's like a golf course where you swing the ball and you don't know where the ball is going unless you're in perfect control. So information and data are also very important, which is why storytelling is now today I call it military asset. So this is something which would have never thought. So let me stop there because I have very good panelists who will elaborate or bring more, deep dive perspectives to this. But let me make just 2 points before I conclude. One is that in practice, based on the perspectives or principles I've said, it's important to defend democracy and values because to me, that is even more important than territory today. So to me, what I'm defending are my values. What I'm defending, if you're an Indian, is the constitutional values. So it is not about some ancient history. It is not about religion. It has to be about the values and civilizational facts you stand for, which means that a non-territorial view with a non-conventional use of technology becomes very important. From a practice level, I mean, we need to have command centers even for this. For instance, I was just noticing that India has a National Cyber Security Coordination Agency, which comes under the Ministry of Electronics. Now, imagine 150 years ago or 15 years ago, nobody thinks of setting up an Air Force under the Defense Ministry. I was thinking, look, this cyber security agency should be under the Defense Ministry and not the Electronics Ministry, at least from the perspective of defense. So you need appropriate knowledge systems, appropriate hiring. And I was thinking, what would I do next if I was the defense minister? I said I will have an interdisciplinary committee that will include filmmakers and storytellers, because it's not just about information and data, it's also about narratives. So the narratives have to be countered by narratives. Information, even when I was covering the Kargil war, I learned a lot from the military generals and brigadiers I was meeting. I was told an artillery gun is not a mortar gun. And if you're using a mortar, fine, the return fire should be exactly in the same proportion. So I was thinking information warfare is no different. Disinformation based on one data should be countered by the right data, and only in exceptional situations you should use a rumor to counter disinformation. So the conventional view is to defend yourself very systematically. If you see in the Ukraine war, the Russian Air Force has lost its muscle because the air defense has become miniaturized for the Ukrainians. Therefore, Air Force has lost some of its old clout because anti-aircraft guns have become portable like smartphones. So you need a similar equivalent even in psychology, even in information. You need good storytellers who can sometimes challenge an entire film with one tweet. This is the way you should think. The non-conventional threats require non-conventional responses. And if you want one word on how to counter it, it is human creativity. Creativity is always there, even in destructive situations. And, I want to learn and end with an expression that I love, which is called the charm offensive. That, we come from India, which produces Bollywood movies. So whenever you go to Central Asia or Africa, you'll find that even people who don't know the name of the prime minister know about film stars. So soft power is a very important component of countering non-traditional threats, and alongside what I call an interdisciplinary approach to cybersecurity. I hope I've been helpful. Thank you.
Friend, that was indeed a very interesting points of view made on non-conventional challenges. And of course, I always have thought the non-conventional challenges to be that which threatens, as it is already known. It's not territorial alone, but it affects and touches human lives. No, that is what is the fear and threats we get for which we see right across the globe, these challenges. So now we shall move on forward to Dr. Adil Rashid, who will touch upon other non-conventional threats that deal with, that is globally affecting many aspects of life. Please, sir.
Thank you very much. It's a real privilege to be here amongst you all. And I would like to take the very argument our eloquent speaker just mentioned about. We are moving in very different directions. We are into the realm of hybrid warfare and very unconventional kinds of warfare, which may be fought in the stock exchanges. It could be fought in the election campaigns. There are allegations that Russia probably rigged the election in the US in 2016. So the extent to which warfare is being done even in the civilian realms is extreme. But there is one other great front which has opened up, which is the cognitive domain, and where actually it is in the realms of ideas. And one of the biggest threats is that what we actually thought that we are living in a liberal scientific world, even when there was socialism or Marxism, it was actually based on its own kind of a rational way of looking at the socio-economic disparities and its own views on social justice or whatever. Its concerns were basically humanistic. But now we are facing a kind of a challenge coming from a non-humanist religious extremist views. And there the motivations are not this worldly, they are very otherworldly. Mm-hmm. And that is a kind of an asymmetry which many of our forces and our strategic experts find themselves to be at bay to a great extent. And I would only like to say here that we need to have a better understanding of the concepts and the very ideas which these organizations are using to radicalize people. It is very convenient for people to say that social media is being used to radicalize people. But social media is a means. What are the triggers? What are the messages? What are the real buttons which are pushed, which actually make someone to act or behave in a particular manner? And here, I think we need to understand cultures which are lying underneath the cover of the liberal order which came into existence in the 20th century. Underneath that, there is a lot of history which is being, people are trying to revive. Many cultures, many philosophies, many mythologies, which still hold their appeal. And I think there we need to understand. We also need to understand many of the radical messages, like I had the opportunity to study ISIS literature, Al-Qaeda literature, and the kind of language they use and what are the real terminologies they use to um, uh, get the kind of support they get. So it is in the ideological domain, it is in the cognitive domain that we need to understand. We also need to understand that all jihadist or all extremist, violent extremist groups are not the same. They have certain differences among themselves. To paint all of them with one black, broad brush could be quite misleading. Let me explain it to you. The Taliban has been an ally of Al Qaeda since the 1980s. But the Taliban has always tried. I mean, you can say Taliban came in the 1990s, but the Mujahideen were close to the Al Qaeda since the 80s. But the Taliban has always been open to the idea of being part of the international order. Even under Mullah Umar, they wanted to be part of the UN. They also had their embassies in 3 countries in the Gulf and others at that time. So they were open to being accepted by the international order. Al Qaeda and the Salafi jihadists have a position which is strictly non negotiable. They do not like the idea to negotiate with any adversary, be it Muslim or non Muslim. Al Qaeda, to that extent, is a little less extreme, but ISIS definitely, even when it comes to its Salafi ideology, it will like all Salafis to accept their caliph as their caliph. And if they don't do it, they are not Muslims, because how could you be against your Pope? How could you be against your caliph? So we need to understand the differences between terrorist organizations. If you do not know the ideology and the basic premise, you cannot know how they will strategize, what would be their modus operandi, what would be their position on negotiations, even what would be their end state. Like the Taliban is basically Pashtun very Pashtun oriented, Hanafi extremist Devbandi organization, which follows the Hanafi Ashari Maturidi school of thought. It is a completely different philosophical interpretation of religion, you can call it theological school, than that of the Salafi Wahhabis. The Salafi Wahhabis, the Salafi jihadists, rather, because Salafi jihadism is a subset of Salafi Wahhabis. Not all Salafi Wahhabis are problematic. You have the 6 GCC countries, which 2 of which at least are openly Wahhabi states, and Qatar and Saudi Arabia. And you have a huge cosmopolitan societies in the UAE and other places. So to brand any kind of a subsect also in one color is not correct. However, the Salafi jihadists, who may be a sliver of that community of Wahhabis, they follow a particular takfiri ideology. So we should understand the term takfiri. We don't have enough time for that. Takfiri, the thing that you call somebody a kafir, and that gives you the right to kill somebody or the entire community. That is a takfiri ideology. So when it comes to Central Asia, we need to understand how Central Asia converted to Islam. Central Asia, which was actually during the great empire of Genghis Khan, posed a major threat to the Arab Caliphate of that time, the Abbasids. In 1258, Baghdad was actually ransacked in a massive way. And it was a big challenge for the Arab world. The Caliphate was for the first time defeated by a major foreign power. So there was a change. The Abbasids, who followed a very rationalist Greek philosophers influenced ideology of the Mutazila, about 2/3 of the stars even today are having Arabic names in English, mainly because much of the astronomy at that time was under the Abbasid times. Algebra, Al-Khwarizmi, and all this thing. But it all changed once Mongols invaded Baghdad. And it was the Sufis who did not accept the rationalism of the Mu'tazila, and there was a complete antithesis in the Muslim thought, which has not left the Muslim community since then. So there has been no scientific revival, there has been no mathematical geniuses coming after that. And so, and it was said that there is no room for any reinterpretation of religion. The doors of ijtihad have been closed forever. But it was these people who actually, these Sufis who were more spiritual, not rational, because of the shamanic traditions of the Central Asian marauders, they were more influential. And in over a course of 100 or 200 years, much of Central Asia converted to Islam, mainly because of the Sufi thought, the Hanafi Sufi tradition. Now, the Salafi tradition is fundamentally opposed to the Hanafi school. If you read ISIS literature, they will call the Murjia community. The Murjia is a term used for postponers. The Murjia term actually means a postponer. The Hanafi school of Islamic law, which is spread out not only in Central Asia, but in much of northern India, was actually, in India at least, one of the reasons why so few Indians joined ISIS or Al-Qaeda. Because of because of the antithetical nature between Salafism and Hanafism. Deobandism is probably the only subsect of Islam which has fallen to the wiles of Salafi jihadism. Otherwise, you are not fighting Islamist extremists. You are mainly fighting Salafi jihadists around the world, whether it is in Africa, whether it is in Southeast Asia, wherever. And they have made a very well conceived, straight-jacketed narrative on how to radicalize people and how to use contemporary politics to influence people. So what we are actually fighting is the Salafi jihadist narrative and their concoctions. I'm sorry, we have very little time. So, okay. So one of our great strengths would be that the Hanafi tradition, it has its own problems. It is regressive, it is anti-science. It's very bad when it comes to women's rights. It is worse than the Wahhabis when it comes to women's rights, which is evident in what Taliban does to its women, which is worse than even what ISIS does to its women. I mean, arguably. But at least ISIS involves women in their wartime activities. Taliban doesn't even do that. So we need to understand that the Sufi tradition is not the only, there's a reason for that. The Hanafis accept nationalism. And so when the Taliban talks about Pashtunwali or the Pathans, and now they're saying that we are even going to embrace the Afghan identity, they are people who accept that Islam allows space for you to be loyal to your nation, to defend your culture. Unlike the Salafi jihadists who follow jihad fi sabilillah, there is no room for any culture, no room for any nationality, no room for any ethnicity. You are fighting for Allah across the globe until the creation of the global caliphate. So there is a major distinction between these two organizations. Taliban can sometimes support Al-Qaeda, which is more pan-Islamist. Al-Qaeda used even the Shia. Imad Mughniya, who was a member of the Hezbollah, they used his services to carry out the Khobar attacks in the late 90s in Saudi Arabia, which killed many US soldiers. You had Hamza bin Laden actually being raised in Iran, which is a Shia country, you know that. So Al-Qaeda is pan-Islamist. It can get along with the Deobandi Taliban. It can recognize the Taliban, but ISIS does not. ISIS is so dyed in the wool that many of bin Laden's own compatriots like Qahtani and like even Zarqawi, who was at that time in Afghanistan in the 90s, did not recognize Taliban because of its Hanafi Deobandism as an Islamic emirate. These differences are important to understand because these are playing out right now why Taliban does not get along with the ISKP. Having said that, there are many Ahle Hadith, Wahhabis who do get along with the Taliban also. So we should not be very straight-jacketed in a way we look at Ahle Hadith versus, but the differences are very stark. One of the major differences is that the Hanafi tradition tells you do not judge a man by his religion. It is possible that man could be a Muslim in God's eyes, or maybe before his death he may become a Muslim. So it is for God to judge a person on the day of judgment and punish a person accordingly. As a human being, you cannot pass judgment. This is a very fundamental belief which actually allows Sufism to become more assimilative in its appeal and to reach out people. So when the Muslim power militarily declined, it was the Sufis through this message that they were able to get the Mongols onto their side, not through military means. But because of this fundamental idea, you find Central Asia and India to be more receptive to other cultures, that we will not judge anybody's character. The other point, and this is why they are called postponers or murjia, they postpone that judgment until the day of judgment.
Fascinating.
Right? So when it comes to, so what we need to do, Devband is a typically Indian movement which has tried to reconcile the differences between Sufis and Salafis, which is a typical Indian thing, reconciling contradictions, which has always been there. But sometimes the Devbandis, being a split schizophrenic, they sometimes move towards Salafism more and sometimes to Sufism more. So we would like, I know Central Asian countries have been under the influence of the Soviet socialist ideology and they have looked down upon religion. But the more you understand religion, you will be able to know how to negotiate and maneuver your way through this terrain. You will know the ideological differences and you will be able to strategize accordingly. And I think that basic understanding in the cognitive domain is essential for fighting these non-conventional threats. I'll end here and maybe in the Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rashid. Now, ladies and gentlemen, of course, we have lots of scholars from Central Asia. And me having served in Central Asia, I do have certain differences of opinion with Dr. Rashid on the question of Islam. As I see Islam in Central Asia, it is very orthodox. Orthodox in the sense that they go by the book. The book is important in Islam, and that is where, you know, I had a very good friend who was the president of the Democratic Party of Tajikistan, Otakan Latifi. Of course, God bless him, he's no more. But he said, like, according to the book and the way the prophet led his life, you can pray anytime. You don't have to pray only 5 times. You can pray anytime, however many times you want. You can even pray once with the Lord, no problem. But he said you must not be under intoxication. That's the most important thing in Islam, that when you think of the Lord, you must not be intoxicated. So therefore, in the Soviet tradition, there is what is known as, you know, of course, in Soviet Union, people observe Ramzan, and like Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, they all observe Ramzan. Now, during Ramzan, I know there was Mr. Torzanzadeh who told Latifi Sharminda because he was drinking vodka with me. So he told him, he said, it's better to have vodka once in this weather than to do namaz 5 times. Now, that also tells you the liberal attitude that exists and founded within the Islam practiced in Central Asia. Of course, the new interpretation and threats to society via Islam, etc., is a new development. And a new development being rather, I would put it as interpretations given by are very good American jihadists. So I leave it at that for people to think. And now I invite Dr. Valeri to talk on his perceptions of non-conventional threats or challenges. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Chair Ambassador Muthukumar sir. First of all, apologies for coming late.
No, I came on time.
Yeah. So I'm going to speak about the challenges of non-traditional threats. This is specifically with reference to China's advent, its attempt to get into Central Asia. China coming to Central Asia is not a new story, but connecting China's advent in Central Asia, keeping its technological adventures, because Central Asia shares boundary with Xinjiang, and China has been predatorily doing a lot of things in terms of surveillance, in terms of technological control in Xinjiang, physically one of the largest provinces of China. So suddenly there are spillover effects for Central Asia. And since Central Asia is a part of China's SRAB, Silk Road Economic Belt, so it has a legal way to knock the door of Central Asian states and then, cross the path. And it has been proliferating Central Asia with a number of technologies. So that is a broad idea what I'm going to speak. So to start with, before we talk about China's interventions, economic, political, geostrategic interventions in Central Asia, there have been cases where the Chinese enterprises, both the state-led enterprises and private enterprises, have been proliferating in Central Asian region in a large numbers. Well, that is fine, because if they are acting to help the Central Asian states to develop, sustain, and benefit their local economies. But with respect to recent allegations of the Chinese companies evading auditors, regulators, and government compliances, and this can be found in a number of documents. Recently, the Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act, HFCCC, US, has brought a number of non-compliances being observed by the Chinese companies. Why is so unique about China? Because China always believes that evasion, non-compliances, or evading auditors and regulators is common outside China. This has been normalized, this has been accepted as one of the easiest way that China could always penetrate into the economies. And if you just try to map largely where the Chinese companies have been successful geographically, Southeast Asia, Africa, Latin America, Central Asia. These regions are vulnerable in three terms: legally, economically, and relatively. When I say legally, because these states are finding defragmentation systemically, so China pitches in, defragmentation at economical level, sustainable level, so China definitely comes into the picture and then offers them good packages. And third thing is relatively in the sense power vacuums, vacuums created by the retreat of the major powers or maybe the regional powers. And that has been giving China a lot of bandwidth to get into the area of Central Asia. Well, that is the symptom or the behavior of China's, what Chinese have been doing. But the larger problem is China has been using these vulnerabilities, legal, economic, and relative vulnerabilities, to come into the regional politics, which they at all not conversed of. Post 1978, before 1978, even China opened up. China was a closed economy and was also closed state. After 1992 and after economic reforms, further economic reforms in 1990, China started talking about economics. Now, there is a major problem of intersection over here. Well, economy economic sustainability is a non-traditional way of securing your boundaries from inside. But if you use economy as one of the criteria to threaten or to try to predate the economy, that becomes one of the major concerns of non-traditional security threat. Here, I'm specifically talking about tech economics. Economics, but within economics, a technological is one of the strongest variables which China has been using it. Last year, China boasted about launching more than hundreds of satellites. China boasts about installing the constellation of its geo satellites in the orbitary, Peto 1, 2, and 3. China also boasts about having the sophisticated technology which can catch people with the fingerprints and also eye retinas. Interestingly, there are two important goals why China is using technology as one of the variables within the economic approaches in Central Asia. There's two important reasons why it's happening. Number one, because Beijing's primary concern is about security and development of Xinjiang Autonomous Region, which shares about approximately 3,000 kilometers of boundaries with Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. Well, that is one of the core concerns. China has several worries. I hear when most of the researchers, academicians, professionals, and operationals talk and say that China is worried about US, China is worried about Japan, Australia, Quad, Indo-Pacific, and so on and so forth. To my belief, what China is more insecure and concerned about is the internal dynamics. China is fighting with its own people, not with people from outside. And that's the major concern. And as a result of it, this spillover of securitizing its control, domestically control in Xinjiang, has these certain natural spillover effects. So the core of China's strategy seems to be creating close ties between Xinjiang and Central Asia, and with the aim of reinforcing both economic development, political stability. But on the hindsight, technology is using as one of the important and easiest way to do that. Second, as I said, second important factor why China is using this tech economics is also energy, precious metals, and other natural resources which are flowing into China, coming from the region. These are the two important parameters which has been influencing China's way of looking at Central Asia, and China is not looking beyond this thing. Well, as an academician, I can only caution because China will not change its behavior no matter what happens. Whether it is 2 centenary, 4 centenaries, or 5 centenaries, it is not going to change. There was a time actually India was really worried about China coming into the neighborhood, investing in Dhaka stock exchanges, or trying to lay its hands on the ports in the Indian Ocean. But we let our neighbors develop relationship with China and understand the problems. The same thing is happening with the farther lands where China is using the technology and tech economics to engage with most of these countries, and then there are pitfalls countries are realizing about it. Now, going to the important thrust of this paper, when I'm explaining about the non-traditional approaches of China, that is economics and technology, and then tech economics deploying in Central Asia and how that is threatening it, I put up a case over here where it has been found out and it has been brought to the notice by United Nations Special Program for Economies in Central Asia, SPECA, SPCA, which closely works with United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, UNECE, and also with United Nations Economic Social Commission for Asian Pacific, where these reports have categorically helping the Central Asian states with regard to the implementation of technology. They have been helping Central Asian states to improve the infrastructure, what we call critical infrastructure with regard to technology, implementation of it, and how to regulate it, how to create compliances. Interestingly, when these things are happening in Central Asia, when Central Asia is trying to understand how they can develop technology, how they can deploy technology for their benefits, there lies uh, a chance which China was looking for, because before these compliances come in place, before these regulatory terms coming in place, China wanted to play a big role. And as a result of it, you would say that China has been complicating the legal issues in 5 distinct areas. China's coming in Central Asia, deploying tech economics has complicated 5 different scenarios. One, legal infrastructure, legal certainty. This is all with regard to IT, ICT or technology. Legal infrastructures, legal certainty, legal security, legal protection, and legal deterrence. And this has been found by Speka's report, and they figure out and they warn Central Asian states of possible vulnerabilities and problems Chinese technological companies coming in Central Asia. When I talk about legal principles, it is with regard to the regulatory structures for ICT and the players, various players. ICT has manufacturers, hardware producers, as well as those who make the programs, and harmonizing ICT rules. To give you one example, when we talk about Quad, and we talk about the Quad countries having the joint naval exercises, why it is done has a number of other reasons, but one of the reasons is to getting harmonized with the way we understand the exercises, and to bringing the standardization. That we're talking about 4 democracies, Quad, but we're talking about Central Asia, where there has been volatilities as well as the technological regulations are concerned, and those are not in place, and that gives the best chance and excuse China to come into the picture. There are 2 interpretations of this. China interprets this thing saying that we are coming to help you, and the second interpretation is that Central Asia is giving easy, wider open invitation to China to come in and then complicate the matters further. This is with regard to the legal principles. Second one, legal certainty. What is legal certainty? Legal certainty is with regard to ICT and SNDs. When you develop a technology, there has to be a certain narration and a roadmap, which the Central Asian states are yet to develop, and then China is giving them a blueprint, a stencil to develop the technology, lending them the servers. Even China's most Ministry of Science and Technology have servers hired from Alibaba. Alibaba has a lot of other companies, sister companies. So Alibaba has, jokes apart, but this is the reality. Alibaba has one company called Alimama, okay, which provides the servers. And the servers are being hired by the most of the Chinese ministry companies. And surprisingly, it's a private company. Central Asian states or maybe other states think that, oh, it's a private company, it's not a state-owned company, but there is a warning. The alarm is ringing wide open and loudly. We yet to understand that problem. So the legal certainty is the retention of data messages. We had a problem in India where it was found out that most of the information used by one of the telecommunication brand in India, I'm not naming it here because not a good platform to do that, but has been relaying the information through the Chinese servers. If that happens, that means that these states which are struggling to build the networks, ICTs, SNTs, is necessarily routing through the information or technology through the Chinese servers or Chinese infrastructure. That is a major issue. That was number 2. Number 3 is legal ICT security. So as far as Speka's reports says, there is no legal setup or formalization with regard to digital signature, data protection, and managing ICT security risk. China has not come forward explaining, cajoling, explaining what is its stance when it trying to use it technology and come to Central Asian economies and state. Digitization, security, everybody needs it. and then everything like wealth is now electronically wealth is managed. In that case, are you allowing China to manage your wealth, national wealth, and create adverse effects? That is one of the major problems Central Asian states have to think about, which falls in the category of non-traditional. The last one is legal protection, trademarks, copyright, consumer protection. Remember, Central Asian states are very rich in natural resources and have abundance capacity as far as human resources concerned and the connectivity projects are concerned. India is part of AIIB and has never shied away from funding projects in Central Asia through AIIB. But the problem is that China has been always non-committal as far as trademark, copyright, and consumer protections are concerned. This is a serious thing, and China has been putting a lot of pressure on Central Asian states to not ask for answers from the Chinese companies, whether those are private and public. So by understanding the above, one can easily comprehend that how different projects which have been implemented, deployed, and initiated by China in Central Asian states have links to the so-called digital Silk Road. Now, something has to be there which can basket China's information, China's attempts. So this digital Silk Road was created as one of the, you have Metroiska dolls, right? So they have used these Metroiska dolls to put or basket everything into a nice package called digital Silk Road. Well, that sells well because China is good in branding. Even to sell needle, China can spend tons of cartons. The same thing has happened over here. So as a word of caution, so what kind of, uh, uh, in case of eventualities and problems, are Central Asian states prepared to deal with such challenges? And my conclusion with that is, with the prospect of growing complexities with regard to digital critical infrastructure, Central Asian states need a partner. And I'm saying this thing with a lot of proudness that lately India has been talking in last 6 to 7 years to train human resource from Central Asia and also lend help to creating digital superhighways and infrastructure. That is inflection point where India is coming into picture, and I think that is one of the major takeaways. I would like to stop here and take your questions later. Thank you so much.
Dr. Valeri. Now, that was an excellent presentation, a very good point of view on China being a non-conventional threat and challenge in Central Asia, which is to a large extent true. It's a true fact if we look back, but one must understand history also because you see, China was exiled from Central Asia in 751 AD at the Battle of Talis or Battle of Atlaq, when the Abbasid Caliphate were in Khorasan and they got involved with a battle in Fergana Valley. And with that, the Tang dynasty was defeated in 751 AD, and then they went back interior and left Central Asia very much. And thanks to the Battle of Talis, Islam was able to also flourish subsequently because there was a paper with one of the agreements after the Battle of Talis was the sharing of the paper technology and printing technology from the Chinese. So that was the reason how. As a matter of fact, when you talk about Islam, the hadiths of the Prophet was first brought about and printed in Bukhara and the man who wrote the hadiths in Dari was Muhammad al-Bukhari. So that's the history to this thing, and that is one of the arrogance that comes to the Persians of the hardest having been made in Dari. Now, that apart, the important thing is the Chinese have come back in 1991 after the dismantling of the Soviet Union. So we should not grudge it. They came after many centuries. And, uh, and now, of course, the biggest non-conventional threat is not only from China, but there is what we call the debt trap. Now, that itself is the biggest non-conventional threat, and stopping the development. And Central Asia, in particular, is a landlocked region where there is no exit other than the railroad and many things that are to be brought in. So there is these are the challenges, and no economic development, no external interaction will definitely threaten any economy. And economy not growing also is a threat to the people and the region. And when I said non-conventional threats and challenges, it really relates to humanity. And it is definitely beyond the territory. But if you look at the region, I think we have to pay a lot of attention to this non-conventional challenges and threats. And of course, India pays a lot of attention to Central Asia attention, but unfortunately, we have not been able to respond correctly to the needs of Central Asia. And since 1992, I think we are still thinking on what we should be doing there. So that is the thing. And now I shall hand over the thing for Dr. Puneet Gaur to tell us his assessment of our three scholars who spoke on the non-conventional threats and challenges. Please, Dr. Puneet Gaur.
Thank you so much, Jay. At the outset, I would like to give many thanks to Professor Nirmala ma'am for giving me this opportunity to present my views, as well as my job is to make a thread between all the speakers previously, speak on the topic of non-traditional threats. What I'm going to do into the next 5 to 10 minutes is that I will put my perspective, my experience in Central Asian countries, my research in Central Asian countries with all three previous speakers. Key points. I will start with the last one, Dr. Arvind sir. What my experience is that as far as traditional threats is concerned in Central Asia, my point of view is that through multi-vector foreign policy, Central Asian countries more or less mitigate these challenges to traditional threats somehow. But now they are having this complexity to have the non-traditional threats in many forms in this particular Central Asian region. As Dr. Arvind sir has rightly pointed out, and I am also second this opinion, is that China is very much specialist to making the non-traditional threats as an excuse to penetrate and convert them into the traditional threat into the respective countries. This we need to understand that how China is doing into that. It is using excuse of non-traditional threats. It is telling the countries that you have this non-traditional threats and you have to overcome these non-traditional threats and penetrate into these countries and presenting the threat into the traditional one. Another point which is very important when Madhun sir was telling about us the narratives and the misinformations and the fake videos, two very recent events in Central Asia. First one was January event in Kazakhstan, and the second event is in Uzbekistan, Karagal, Pakistan, after the reform announced by the respective presidents of the countries. So how these events spread into the rapid spread of this misinformation in calculate into this kind of incident, it was surprise for their own country also. It was surprise for everyone that how these nowadays these new technologies, how they are having this non-traditional threats and presenting themselves as into the traditional threat. When CSTO called by Kazakhstan president, the Collective Security Treaty Organizations, came up into that for the January 2022 events, and somehow he managed that within a period of time after the cleaning up all these things, it went into that. These two events tell us that how misinformation, how narratives, how perspectives is playing into these non-traditional threats. Apart from that, one very important point which raised by Dr. Adil Rasid sir is the religious extremism. This is one of the very important threat, non-conventional threat, which Central Asian countries we are supporting as Indian. We are supposing that since 1991, after independence, we are thinking that these are the non-traditional threat, these religious extremism or fundamentalism or something like that, having always a threat for Central Asian countries. But somehow, if you see the data, if you see the facts, since last 3 decades, I don't think so there were many incidents which you can count on this ground, the religious extremism ground, into these countries, which happened in a larger scale. I'm not talking about in general way, but I'm talking about in larger scales. How many events have taken place in the context of religious extremism? So I think when Adil Rashid was telling about that different views of different kind of perspective of either it is Hanafi or Sufi or other things, is that leaders, when they got independence and the respective Central Asian leaders starting from 1991 to making the policies towards religious extremism. And I always quote this point that when Kazakhstan this into the very first constitutions, the very first thing is that the Kazakhstan is a secular country. So that is something which is tell us about that Central Asian countries, how they were also very much into the trouble, that maybe this is the biggest threat they were facing at the time of independence. But due to their policies, due to their how to say that counter to all these practices, they are come to the closer into that they are not having these kind of larger scale point of time. Other threat which is very important in terms of the Central Asia is the climate change. That is something which is now triggering into this Central Asian countries, which we need to take into the considerations that nearly about, as World Bank data is saying, that nearly about $10 billion they are investing per year for to mitigating these natural disasters and all this. Previous speakers also talked about that avalanches, flood, and different kind of glaciers, Himalayan glaciers are melting. So these are threats, and Aral Sea threats are also there. So something which is pointing out is that we need to understand in point of time that these threats of climate change is also, although they are also doing very important things through sustainable development goal. All the countries, mostly the Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, are doing a great job as far as sustainable development goals is concerned regarding climate change, and they are investing a lot into this project. Because I was the director of this Institute of Silk Road, of Silk Way in the Eurasian National University. There we have the project that how these sustainable development goals can create a platform to mitigate the non-traditional challenges in these particular Central Asian countries. So this is something which we need to understand in that point of time. Another thing is that I already discussed about that how this earthquake, not the only hazard, Central Asia is also prone to landslide, flood, droughts, avalanches, and extreme temperature. This is also very important. Another point is that, like the rest of the world, Central Asian countries were deeply affected by COVID-19. That is also very important. And that pandemic destabilized public health system in Central Asia. Several studies have been done on Central Asia on behalf of that what are the consequences of this pandemic. And they showed that these are one of the lessons which they learned from this COVID-19 or pandemic about Central Asian countries is that humanitarian operation in the region is the definition of vulnerability needed to be better defined in such situation where resources are finite. So that is very important to understand in terms of Central Asian countries. Another point which Dr. Rashid sir was talking about the Taliban. No doubt in that the Taliban dispensations in Afghanistan also creating a another type of dimensions for bordering, especially for the bordering Central Asian countries into that. But you need to see the approach of Central Asian countries in recent time. They are really into that. They are in on the table with the Taliban government. They are having conversation. They have having talk about that. They are discussing with that because they knew that the threat can be only the way of mitigating this. Even they are suggesting to the world that that is the discussion is the only way to help to mitigate of this particular challenges of Taliban dispensation of in Afghanistan. So I think this is also one of the very important element into this non-traditional threat. Another one which is very recent, different geopolitical events is happening. Russia-Ukraine crisis is also happening into that in Central Asia region. They are also having effect of that because remittances are very much Central Asian countries remittances are very much into that. They are also having this kind of problem into that, and there's no doubt to say that there are very much linkages whenever we are talking about the economy of Central Asian countries and Russia. They are very much interlinked into that, and they are very much dependent on that. So they also try to see the alternatives, and they are trying to find out the alternatives. Central Asian countries, that's why the Central Asian countries are now talking about the connectivity with South Asia into this perspective. So these are some of the threats, and these are some of the challenges as well as opportunity for other countries, other regions to having a kind of work on that how Central Asia, or if we are talking about India's perspective, we can say that since last 8 to 9 years, the kind of political understanding we have with Central Asian countries, it was nowhere there into that perspective. And there are several point out like meetings have been taken place so rapidly. I was really shocking. I was really surprised to see that whether it is the national security meeting or summit, or whether it is the first Central Asia, India Central Asia dialogue, or whether it is dialogue on behalf of the foreign secretaries or foreign ministries. There are several platforms provided by India to Central Asian countries to come up into that. Even the SCO, which we are presiding over into within this year, we have this centric point that SCO should be for the Central Asia. Central Asia is the center point of the SCO, and India is always backing into that because Central Asian countries are also making into this that although we are expanding SCO, but still Central Asia should be the center of, and India is also second this opinion. And so, that is some of the platform which SICA is also one of the platform which can be used. SCO, SICA, these platform can be used to mitigate the challenges of non-traditional threats. And I think all the previous speakers, which they presented in a way what kind of non-traditional security or threats are there into the Central Asian countries, we can mitigate with these to using these kind of platform. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Dr. Gaur, thank you very much. Well, now, there are certain things, I think, of course, everybody has been talking about Ukraine-Russia war. And yes, sir, I'll come to you. The Russia-Ukraine war, they keep talking, but then we must understand the history of the conflict also, because there is what is very well known is that there is the Rossiyskaya Zemlya, which we have to to understand the history. And Russia and Ukraine need not be fighting. That the non-conventional aspect of that fight is that there is external interference, like what we said, the Americans coming in the way and so many things, and NATO and so on and so forth. So in the sense, the focus is on Central Asia. So let us confine ourselves to Central Asia. And now I'll make it the house open to questions. And let me start here just a moment, sir, one by one. I'll be grateful because we are recording. So if you mention your name and then ask a question, so we can go ahead with it. We have a good 15 minutes for Q&A. 15 minutes. We have well covered it within this time gap. Yes, sir, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Evgeny Kablukov, Kyrgyzstan. I should like to point to and talk about two things. First of all, I remember what previous session, our colleague Kalimov said that our politician, he named it Madumarov. Yes, he's a very famous politician, but you know, he doesn't says official things. He's just a opposition politician, and you know, about him, people say that this politician first speaks and then begins to think. And he is widely criticized in the country, you know, for his some sayings. I suppose that in Tajikistan also we may find many people who speak against Kyrgyzstan. But we really should rely on official positions. The second point, the theme of this session is unconventional threats. And I would like to talk about one unconventional threat. It's American policy in Central Asia. Before the, you know, remember situation in Kazakhstan last year, CTSTO, Collective Security Treaty Organization, assisted in full strength and showed his strength and ability. United States was very concerned with this situation, and what the situation showed aftermath that they want to dissolve the CSTO, and they define it weak countries in the organization. It's Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. No, to settle things with Armenia, Americans did it to European Union. But what concerns Kyrgyz-Tajik conflict, this was before this conflict. Tajikistan, you know, Mr. Alimov will say whether it's true or not. Some representative from American Central Command visited Tajikistan. You know, Central Command is not humanitarian organization, you know. And then after the conflict was ended, the representative from of Central United States Central Command visited Kyrgyzstan, maybe supposedly to see damages what were made. And a week after this conflict, a lady from U.S. Department of State came, and she met journalists, students, especially journalists who opposition journalists whom they give money and support them. And after this meeting, the next day in social network, there was a publication from one journalist. I know him very well. He works for American. Works for American. Some Radio Liberty, and he published that before this fight started, Putin visited Tajikistan, and that's immediately fighting started, and so Putin is culprit with this situation. You know, that's why we should, in Central Asia, we should be very cautious with this American policy in Central Asia. It is a new non-conventional threat to our countries. Thank you.
Very much. Do you have any questions, sir? Okay. Okay. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Beruni Alimov from Uzbekistan. If I may, I have one question to two speakers, Mr. Narayanan and Dr. Gaur. You were talking about the new threats and challenges. Especially you were talking about the disinformation and misinformation. I was just going to ask you, what are the plans, if you have, how you are going to combat these problems in India, because the object is the ordinary people, how you are going to protect them, and what are your suggestions to Central Asian countries, because we have the same problem. Thank you.
It's very important. It also indirectly addresses what he said. You know, India is a sovereign country. It's a ancient civilization. It's also very modern. So first of all, it's very important because whenever you deal with something, you also have to deal with value system and mindsets. So one way is India also happens to be a technology leader in this phase. We are doing a wonderful balancing act between old-fashioned territorial sovereignty and modern democracy. Therefore, it's important to set the context for this. So talking to your own people and both internal and external communication is very important part of this new scenario. This has, first of all, we need a slightly open mindset because it's very important because a lot has been said on China today. And it's very important to understand that countering disinformation can be of three ways. First way, the Chinese style, which won't suit India at all, and it won't suit most countries, I may say so, is to simply put a silencer or crack down or be very aggressive about it. We are living in interconnected systems where a lot of gain is to be had from investments, from technology. So you cannot shut out people. So what you need is a sophisticated mindset where you create a hierarchy of safety. For instance, server security, which I think Aditya Gallery spoke about. What kind of servers you're setting up so that you are in control and you're also in the hands of trusted people who can actually manage this computer systems well. That is one thing you have to do. That is one line of defense. The second line of defense is to have a system in which disinformation is countered through active engagement in social media by hiring experts and having discussions. This is no different from any conventional war situation where you have to really understand what is the story you listen to, what is the story you put out, because I'm using the word narrative, story, ideology. You know, he discussed ideology very well. Today, we are in a unique situation where ideology, religion, democratic politics, and free media are all intersecting with each other. You need minds of integrity along with technological knowledge and lines of defense. And lines of defense include computer security, what I call, let me coin a new term today called narrative security. Because the narrative security should involve certain expertise in understanding and interpreting data and information, countering the wrong information with the right information, and also effectively using images, because when you're talking to your own people, especially in democracies where many people are not literate and everybody is not a PhD like in this room. So you need communicational strategies that are effective for ordinary people, whether they are watching TV or watching it in smartphones. You know, TikTok is banned in India or Canada is restricting it. But I don't know if TikTok is restricted in Uzbekistan. If it is not, you need a TikTok policy. You need to have your own videos. You need to have your own counter stories. You need to have a cell to monitor that story and another cell to create counter narratives. So it is very important that storytelling is now a very important part of non-conventional defense. And, I must take also into account that we are sovereign countries, and therefore we should treat America and China with equal, caution and assert our interests, not necessarily their interests, because you should first be comfortable with your own sovereignty and then interpret your stories accordingly. And being in tune with, not every country has all the technologies. And technology and the use of technology are two different things. So you need people to train, people should be trained to use some of the technologies. And the technologies include not only the machines, but also the way you use the machine. It need not be computer code. Even using Instagram or TikTok is very important, because we cannot be banning everything in the new age, but we should know how to filter and counter. So understand, filter, counter. These should be, maybe we should have the UFC formula for this. I hope I've helped you.
Thank you, sir. Please.
Just one practical solution is that we have the vast ICT program with the Central Asian countries. So we can include into that ICT program that how to, the counter narrative which Madhun sir was talking about, that how to create this counter narrative into that and how to mitigate this challenge of misinformation and video. So we can do that easily. So through this ICT program, we can also train the graduate from ICT programs, students or teachers also, because their teachers are always there. So they can learn from that program also.
Just a small intervention. I have actually written a book on countering the radical narrative, and in which I have not only told about the narrative, also political narrative and the radical narrative. And then how do we need to counter that? And we need a central agency which makes meta-narratives of our political ideology, of our constitutional ideology, and of our strategic. It should be part of the national strategy of what kind of narratives we are going to disseminate as a government. We can have independent media organizations. They can have their own narratives, but there should be a central narrative on a variety of issues, from defense to other issues, all the issues. And anyway, so perhaps you would like to read that, that's all.
Please.
Well, I mean, the important thing is these are new technologies recently. So the regulators are not even prepared how to deal with that. One fact, one has to understand it. And second thing is, this is unfathomable problem, because you cannot create one security mesh and say that it will be stopped. So as sir has said correctly, storytelling has to be there, a narrative security has to be there, so it can be anticipated and preemptive measures can be taken. My shortest reply to that.
Anyone, please, last question. Please, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, especially to Dr. Adil and Madhavan for all your illuminating presentations. I may follow, which I will follow in next day's session. I will not focus on that briefly. Why I have brief comment, one question. Brief comment about Ambassador Mudhus Kumar's, you spoke about you told that you oppose the Dr. Adil's view on the type of Islam's nature of Islam in Central Asia, which is quite strict now. And you mentioned this your sample from your meeting with somebody. Yes. May I say that when we just, I think Dr. Adil also spoke about that the possibility, the adaptation features and characteristics of any religion, including Islam, towards any new particular cultural context. So while speaking about Central Asia, we also need to take into account those two basic axes like time and space. I think once we use the category of time, it means that we need to contextualize in which period If we speak about Tursunzadeh's meeting, perhaps in 90s, that was just after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Tajik War itself. So it brings us into another context. Whereas nowadays, I'm from Kazakhstan. In Kazakhstan, we have totally another situation as far as religious development is concerned. This is just brief, but perhaps we may need to discuss this in more details later. And thank you very much, Ambassador Muthu, because you also illuminated in your speech about the possibilities of those different. My question maybe to all of you regarding we spoke today about non-conventional threats, and from each of your professional perspectives, you highlighted the most important one as per your views and knowledge. My question is about what if we put in a range or circle out of this range, how do you think, following today's session's debate, what would be the hierarchy of those non-conventional threats as far as Central Asian countries is concerned? So out of all these different, either they're institutional or political actors or some economic factors, what are your perspectives? Just briefly, it's very interesting. Thank you.
Actually, not being a Central Asian, we are nobody to make prioritize what are the non-conventional threats you are facing. I think that is something which from your side would be more meaningful. But when it comes to his intervention, I object to the point that Orthodox, the Sufi Hanafi school is the Orthodox school. The Wahhabi school, which started only 200 years back, is actually a deviant school. It is like the Protestant movement. The Protestant movement was not the Orthodox movement. It was more religiously extreme to begin with, but most modern developments ultimately came from the Protestant movement. Similarly, the Wahhabi fold does not accept any of the four schools of Islamic Sunni law. They are against the Hanafi, Shafi'i, Hanbali, or Maliki. These four schools are the Orthodox schools. A person can be Orthodox and at the same time not be a barbarian. So when he talks about people not drinking wine and being very sacrosanct in the way they offer prayers, they can at the same time not be as savage-like as Al-Qaeda is. So anyway, that is a technical point in that. The other thing is that I think it is for the countries and the kind of level of threats which they are facing, whether it is the jihadist threat or whether it is the climate change or whether it is the cyber security, it is for you to decide country-wise what are, in your estimate, the important threats.
Sir, I have a very small point. I'm sorry I'm intervening at a wrong time. In fact, taking on from Ambassador Muthu Kumar, I'm Bhargav Mitra, former Joint Secretary, Government of India. Owing to my stints in Central Asia, it is one of the most enlightened and most free Islamic zones in the world. It's not Islamic, it is Muslim. We have to understand this. At times we mix up between these two nomenclatures. There's nothing Islamic about Central Asia. Sir,
Muslims, I mean, that is the bottom line. To say they're not Islamic is also incorrect.
If I may interrupt, I use the word Islamism as different from Islam in order to highlight the fact. Well, my point is different. Yeah. My point is that they are far more tolerant. They are far more enlightened. There are hardly any restrictions on religious activities. You are free to go to the mosque or do not go to the mosque. There's nothing comes in the way of your religion and your service to the society. The educational system does not interfere with religion and vice versa. We need to take a leaf out of that, even if we are India, because in India, in several corners, it is less developed than many of the Central Asian countries in their own way. We have to stop looking at Central Asia from a different prism. And it is a wonderful place to live in. Tremendous and modern. If you talk about modernization, modernity, I mean, they will beat a country like India anytime. Hats off to them and thank you so much. I must say, madam, that as a compliment to all the Central Asian countries, when I was in Bangalore for Reuters, I used to think, because I used to read a lot about the Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, I said, Bangalore has great technology, but so much congested roads. We should have our technology centers in, Kyrgyzstan or Kazakhstan, because the weather is nice, the space is much. At the same time, we bring the brains. So it's a good idea. We should try for collaboration of that kind. Talking about your question, madam, my own feeling is what he mentioned, debt trap, and my own personal assessment is that more than cyber security, debt trap and economic warfare is much more serious for any country which does not have a historic instinct. Therefore, this is something on which there should be discipline, because loans are very easily available from certain countries in a certain way. So the Belt and Road Initiative, to me, is potentially something that can land any country in the region to a long-term. You see what's happening in Sri Lanka. So this is something I would put my bet on. But as Dr. Rashid said, you have to make your own assessment.
Okay, sir.
Thank you very much for a lively debate and all the views. Before we break for tea, we have a few mementos for our honored speakers out here. First, for Mr. Narayan. Dr. Adil Rashid. Dr. Yeleri. And finally, for Ambassador Muthu Kumar from Professor Joshi, please.
Here, Bhatia, well, the mountain doesn't go to the prophet, prophet goes to the mountain. Thank you for offering that. Thank you.
We have about 10, maybe 12 minutes tea break. Please join us back at about 3:45 to 3:50 at the latest. Thank you. Thank you. And we are ready to kick off our next session. His Excellency.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends. Now it's time for session number 4. Understanding the cultural heritage of Central Asia and interaction with neighboring countries. Culture is, as you know, culture is very important for people-to-people contacts. And I read some article published by Russian experts, and they said that in 90s, from 30 to 40% of deals of Russian businessmen were not concluded because of lack of culture in interaction. That's why culture is important in every sphere, and certainly Central Asia has very deep cultural roots with India. And today we hear from our speakers many interesting information, as I hope. And there are 3 speakers in my list. All of them are women, as you know. No, culture they always give culture to women speakers. And the first in my list is Laura Yerikesheva, Madam Dr. Laura Yerikesheva. And please, the floor is given to you.
Thank you very much, dear participants. Thank you, Professor Nirmala, and thank organizers, Bubi and Kamla, and other your colleagues who organize this wonderful conference. My presentation today will be about, as Professor Evgeny Kablukov mentioned, about culture. Culture is an eternal thing. Culture as a symbolic systems, and we know that we all live in culture. We all live in symbols, and we're living through these symbols. However, I would like to also draw your attention towards the so-called frameworks of when we speak about culture. We should not, I would say, we should not focus only on these creative representations or visual representations or sound representations only. Rather, I would say that culture today is a way of life, which includes every aspect of our being, of our activities, and of our thoughts. Because this is all-embracing ways, or I would say not ways of life, it means that it is inclusive one. And by saying that, I mean that this inclusivity is important when we speak about such a huge cultural area as Central Asia or South Asia or India, particularly. And I may say that if we speak about culture, of course, we need to speak about cultural identity. And when we speak about identity of those all-embracing inclusive areas or something, it's always raises the questions. And how to deal with this or that aspect of culture is about how to manage, how to survive, to maintain, and to proceed further for any cultural civilizations or states. So by speaking about cultural identity, I would like to draw attention to these frameworks like institutional, relational, and cognitive. Today, the previous session speakers told about this cognitive factor is a very important one in storytelling and in creativity. Yes, this is all elements of our survival, and these are actually the basic elements of cultural survival. If we survive as a cultural entities, we will survive and proceed further. So it means that all starts with ideas, and ideas are nothing without our relations to other social member groups. So that's why relational category is very important, and this is particularly had been highlighted by Professor Marg, and in your questions, how to deal with these relations, whether they're with a plus or minus sign, whether they're good or for better, for better or for worse. So it means that often a relational structure, because this is where our meanings of this or that sign are shaped, then we go towards institutional factor or plane or domain, because it is on this level when these meanings become symbols. And we are in the process of making this symbol throughout our daily life, throughout generations, thousands and millennia of all these narratives that had been created by all civilizations of the world. So from this perspective, I would say that we're talking about a cultural semiosphere, or where, I mean, from the semiotics perspective, I would say that all these meanings that has been elaborated, related, linked to other cultural groups or some ideas became symbols. And only on this institutional level, they become symbols like fully fledged symbols, because this is the plain domain, I mean institutional one, when the symbols became active and they contribute towards all what we call the civilizational reservoir of knowledge. So what I would like to focus now on is that, or to tell that this reservoir of knowledge that has been elaborated throughout so many millennia, throughout so many generations of so many cultural entities throughout our history of the Earth, of the planet Earth, it means that we are all contributing to it. From this perspective, if we're speaking about the cultural identity vis-a-vis cultural embracement, we need to speak about all these elements of knowledge that has been already mingling or intermixing within this reservoir of global knowledge. So it means that any claims towards the cultural distinctions should have, on the one side, have a positive, or on the other side, a negative side. And this is when I previously spoke about the concept of time, it means that we need to contextualize within particular stretches of time. Otherwise, it will be irrelevant. And to claim that the culture of the Central Asia is such and such without identifying the particular spaces, regions, or particular time zones, then we will be in trap. So from this perspective, when we speak about the cultural identities of Central Asia, today we're having, this is a very complicated situation, because we are on the way to process our own institutions. Yes, we are still on this way, following the structural collapses. One of these structural collapses took part in the 90s after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and when the existed institutions almost disappeared, instead you had to build a new one. And in addition to this structural collapse, we had relational collapse as well, and another one which was became a follow-up spillover of the globalization. So within this globalization context, the cultural identity issue became highlighted even more, because being without these institutional structures, being absorbed by globalization process, and then being absorbed and influenced by another ideologies, including negative, including extremist one, this is became, I mean, a cultural field, and the cultural identity of the people of the region became very complicated process one to understand. So we need to separate all these layers to understand in which state of our development we are now. And this comes to another new so-called non-conventional threats, which we discussed, heard about in previous session. This threat of being absorbed by the face of false narratives and being secluded from our ability to make rationalized choices, rational-based choices. It means that these cognitive levels plus relative plus still developing institutional one gives us this plurality of complex of challenges that we need to deal with. What about, I could explain this or give a sample on the case of symbol making in process which takes place in Kazakhstan, and which has been taking place since 1990s, because that was the period when the symbols of the previous cultural, your identity have been collapsed, you need to create a new one. So way to take these symbols, as any new nation, the Kazakhs took in the citizen of Kazakhstan, of course, looked back towards their history. And the history was also being, looking back into the history was a challenge in itself, because you had for 1375 to 22, almost century year period, you have another version of your own history. So you need to reconceptualize, reimagine, and reinterpret your own history, and to find in those huge reservoir of knowledge of the previous past, to pick up those symbolical elements which you think are or could be relevant for your own survival and adaptation to the changing times. That time it was globalization. Talking about 90s. So it means that in order to take these symbolical symbols of the past, you need to take only those symbols which could be relevant for the whole members of your society. Otherwise, it will be not a nation-building process. And bearing in mind that Kazakhstan is a multi-ethnic, multi-religious society, it means you need to pick up these symbols that could answer the aspirations of all social groups members. So from this perspective, in Kazakhstan, I think it has a very interesting, good experience in a sense that it picked up the symbols of the not immediate, but rather more distant past. It means not proceeding towards the medieval period, rather going even back to the Bronze Age period, when the symbols of the Sakras, or so-called Scythian tribes, that this branch of, not branches, these confederations of tribes flourished in Central Asia, in Altai, then, by the way, went to South Asia and contributed to what Indo-Scythian kingdoms and so. So that symbols of the past that have been found throughout the archaeological surveys that took place in 1960s, 69, and then on a larger scale in 90s, even nowadays. So these symbols of the distant past became incorporated in the structure of the modern country as officially designated and officially symbols of the Kazakhstan as an independent state. So that has been reflected in the emblem and flag of the Kazakhstan. And really, it is impressive in a way that you may not even refer to particular religious identity per se. You may not refer to the particular ethnic identity of this or that ethnic groups making modern Kazakhstan. Rather, you may speak about more embracing, more unifying those concepts that could not hurt the political sentiments of peoples at that time in 90s. And 90s was a very hard period and challenging for the people of the region. So it means this unique experience. Why unique? Because you applying for the symbols of the distant past, not, by religious. But saying that, I would also need to stress that even the religious aspect was touched, because, but at that time, if we speak about the Bronze Age, it means first millennium before Common Era. It means at that time the region was full of, the ground for flourishing different religious concepts. And today also the speakers mentioned about shamanism. Yes, one of the elements of those traditional beliefs that still could be, even in some echo of these beliefs could be found, but not in a pure forms, rather they had been incorporated, intermingled with the existing newcomer religions. In case of Central Asia, that was Islam. So, and I also thank for previous speaker, Dr. For the previous session, when we spoke about the adaptation of religions, because to succeed in the new cultural regions, Islam had to survive. And to survive, it had to accommodate the elements and symbols of the previous existing religious system that flourished at that time. And having said that, it means that you need to adopt its own, and this could be possible through those, I would say, marginalized spectre of Islam, that was Sufism, and that was a mostly mystical, individual-based approach towards understanding the God and the world around you, and a world around in you, in which you live. So Sufism was like a vehicle. It was a function. It was a so-called instrument, if I may say so, religious instrument through which Islam could be incorporated and having given roots in the region, spread as a major, I would say, one of the and then major force that shaped the cultural milieu of the region, which we know nowadays. So this is the power of this. I would say, and then it could be institutionalized. So this is the way how we speak from this cognitive, relational towards institutional levels, which gives any actor, any movement, any ideas, possibility to survive through making adaptation towards a new incoming. But making this new adaptation doesn't mean that the previous system had been elaborated at all. So this is also is possible to see at the symbolical range of the modern Kazakhstan's state symbols, like emblem and like flag. Because when we speak about today's like Islam in the Sufi version in Central Asia, we need also speak to the echoes of those shamanistic and then in other beliefs. We may also include this Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, and Nestorian Manichaeism. So Manichaeism and Nestorianism. So all about all this range, which somehow became marginalized throughout the Middle Ages. But please remind me again. Let me remind again. They are not excluded at all. They are present in the subconsciousness, in the cultural ethos, sometimes in creative symbolism, like in films, in plays, in dances as well. And when the looking back to your own cultural roots took place since 1990s, it means that all this multiplicity of subconsciousness elements came to the surface. That's why in 19th, in 20s, we saw the appearance of even so some elements in the art. We in Tengranism, the depicting who we are, the Kazakhs are, who we are as a society and as a cultural groups. And the coexistence of these different symbols became possible because of this multiplicity, immunity, which the people of the country, of the region have in their, I would say, in their DNA. So we must, while speaking about today's Central Asia, I think we need to focus on these primordial elements which are also in our subconsciousness. Somehow, sometimes they pops up, sometimes they disappear. However, throughout the last 2 decades, we may observe another situation when this multiplicity became again marginalized. And this happens with the radicalization trends, which may unfortunately see in the region, including politicization of Islam, including, or which we call Islamists, including the appearance of so-called, as we spoke today, Salafi movements. Somehow it appeared out of nothing, out of sky, out of blue. In early 2000s, you even may not imagine how in Kazakhstan, for example, could appear, or you could witness the existence of this Salafi group. Yet, as 1 decade later, especially in 2000, since 2010 and later, you may now see quite another situation. Even some cultural anthropologists go to the cities of the country and see, and even visually you can identify the new elements of this different religious landscape that takes place in the country. So it coincided with these global trends as well. And we should not eliminate the possibility of some narratives which is also used, narratives are used by some actors, whether they're institutional actors, the individual state actors, or may some group actors of whether abroad the region, now we also speak about within the region itself. So nowadays, in the third decade of the 21st century, we see how the changing situation in the region influence the mindset, mind making, and knowledge construction. This is also very important because we spoke about today. Professor Dr. Madhavan told about this narrative security. Yes, this is exactly the case when the narrative security issues become dominant, and this is how the knowledge is constructed today. So this is just briefly my thoughts about these elements of cognitive relation institutional domains that need to be taken into account within the changing context of Central Asian development, and within also the need to still make, to apply efforts towards nation building, because nation building, it's not just when something has been collapsed, another has been created, country, and then you print is still in the mind, perhaps. To my mind, in Central Asia, we have also the same, and that's where the other narratives takes place and pops up because of this element, what we call Orientalism. Because Orientalism, as a way of knowledge, when you construct knowledge through your own prism of the other, who is not the part of your society of Orient, and through the prism of the other cultures, like, for example, Edward Said spoke about the Western cultures and how the knowledge has been constructed in a particular certain way, which has been replicated, reduplicated, and repeated every time in another way, and that's why it became a mainstream. What is beyond this mainstream is not the true knowledge. So this is how we also in Central Asia trying to make our own knowledge, constructing our own knowledge with some pluses, with some minus, but we're trying to do this and to understand which possible way could be adopted for us. I'm talking about cultural issues, but we understand that today culture is not about visual expressionism, symbolical expression. Culture is about way of life and how we deal and live in this life. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yerkesheva. It's a very interesting and conceptualized report. Next speaker in our list is Nandini Bhattacharya, Dr. Nandini Bhattacharya.
To Professor Nirmala Joshi for giving me this opportunity to participate in this seminar, to share some of my research experience for all these, maybe more than 2 decades, on Tajikistan especially. Today my topic is focusing only one aspect of the Indo-Tajik cultural linkages, that is the literature, field of literature. I begin my paper formally. The smallest of the 5 Central Asian countries, Tajikistan, is rich in her Persian ethno-linguistic and cultural inheritance from the remote past, and therefore had a history of intense cultural interaction with India at different historic phases. In fact, these cultural contacts at distinctive crossroads of human civilization left their imprint in literary imagination of both the regions. To look back through the passage of time, the link between India and Tajikistan was part of a multidimensional interaction between India and Central Asia over different historic epochs. The saga of Silk Road did not only bring commercial connectivity, but also created enormous scope for cultural contact in the antiquity. And this cultural interaction only accelerated with the advent of the Arab-Persian and Turco-Mongol regimes across the vast expanse of West, Central, and South Asian territories. India was a land of richness, a land of fantasy for the alien eyes since antiquity. The same fondness continued even after the Islamic inroads. The historic inheritance of this era is a rich account of Persian language and culture expanding through the elite world of both Muslim and non-Muslim courts. Persian poets and intellectuals of this genre were not confined to any particular geographic, political, or ethnic entity. Persian was the global language at that point of time. It served as a lingua franca for the erudite Islamic world for centuries. The language went through a process of refinement and maturation as it came to be adopted as the primary medium of expression by literary circles across West, Central, and South Asia. India's cultural resplendency and diversity at this point of time contributed considerably to the growth of the Persian linguistic tradition. The language served as the medium of cultural expression towards a symbiotic space. Although in the very spirit of Persian literature, there had not been much any regional boundaries. What happened? Right. Regional boundaries, so far the appeal was concerned, yet this particular paper would mainly concentrate on the perspective of Indo-Tajik linkages reflected in certain very selective treasure of literary collections at certain distinct historic. No, but I would show some video clips that won't work here.
Oh, where is your video?
That will be there. I'll
It is on this mode.
okay. So, sorry for the interruption. So, Indo-Tajik linkages will be highlighted, which is reflected in certain very selective treasure of literary collections at certain distinct historic crossroads. I would take up actually two major, literary instances here. The romanticism over Hindustan that prevailed in Persian literature of the medieval times had palpable resonance in Tajik literature, literary world in particular. And the same reverberated over Indian life and culture that continued even during the culture and ideological metamorphosis under the Soviet leadership. The revival of the past heritage as part of the redefined national identity after the collapse of the USSR had again accelerated the process of revival of historic links with Hindustan in every possible directions. I would go into the two major historic references. One was the reminiscence of Hindu Hindustan and Hafiz and Bedil. I start with Bedil because chronologically he is the earlier one in 14th century. He is writing a couplet, very controversial for different historic and political reason of his time. I recite the beginning of the couplet. Agar un Turkish rozi bedast aurat dile moro, bikhale Hinduash baksham Samarkandu Bukhororo. And this is a very, very complicated, poem that he created, which beneath this feverish love had a number of extremely sensitive historic underpinnings. He wrote this by Turkish Rozi. He meant Timur, and he had been reprimanded by Timur for that. But here we will go into the other tangent where Hinduash Baksham Samarkandu Bukhororo. This particular phrase becomes very, very relevant to the country, and even today it resonates in their culture. By Hinduash, basically it meant the dot or Hindu mole, they said. The Hindu beauty mole of Hafiz's beloved. What is this mole? This is not a physical thing. It actually meant probably the dot the Hindustani women put for beautification. And once again, whether it is in the cheek or forehead, there are a lot of controversy about that too. But what did Hafiz trade off? That is very, very significant. He said, for that Hindu beauty mole, I can even give away Samarkand and Bukhara. Then we go into the historic legacy of the land. What happened to these two cities when Uzbekistan and Tajikistan were segregated to the USSR's nationalities policy. So the land lost the access of these two particular heritage cities. And that is why you find that this couplet is very, very popular even today in Tajik metaphors, and you find that being narrated and iterated in films, in the musical narratives of the local Shashmakam music of contemporary time. If there is time, I will show that later on. And so this is how, the reminder of the euphemism over Hind in the medieval Persian tradition, coupled with the tragic loss of their own historic inheritances of Samarkand and Bukhara a few centuries afterwards, remains a historic experience linked with everlasting romanticism. On the one hand, a romanticism over the loss, a romanticism over Hindustan. Both keeps resonating. The other symbolic literary imagination that had vibrantly represented an Indo-Tajik emotional link was the famous ballad by Abdul Qadir Bidil, who is a Sufi poet, and much of his life he had spent in India. In fact, his dargah is situated very close to Pragati Maidan metro station, Bagi Bedil it is called. It is a very simple kind of tomb, but this has been renovated when Tajik President Imam Ali Rahman visited India. Maybe before that, we had forgotten the significance of this particular, poet. What did he write that makes us very, very close to Tajik emotion is a ballad of Komdeva Madan, it is called, a love story, a court love actually, of an Indian dancer and a singer from Bukharan court. Madan is the singer while Komde is the dancer. And there are, once again, these had been alive, rather immortalized, and repeatedly adopted in different variants of cultural expressions of the land. I would come down to that. And it survived through the Soviet period, adopted and represented in different platforms of culture. In fact, Komdeva Madan is the first adopted opera of Tajikistan done by Ziaudullah Shahidi, who is a very famous music composer of the land, known as a father of modern Tajik music. There is a little clip of this opera also with us, but if time permits, I will go into that. But what is significant about this journey of Komdeva Madan from a Sufistic ballad to an adaptation towards opera, Shahidi had a dream of having an Indian dancer playing the role of Komde to make it as much near perfect as possible, but that was yet remains an unfulfilled dream. Shahidi is no longer. His daughter, Munira Shahidi, pursues the same dream. I don't know when or whether ever this dream will be fulfilled. But they keep on, working on this particular cultural interaction that can come to the level of perfection or fulfillment with the dramatic representation where an Indian dancer can play a role. Now, I would move on to the Soviet era. Bolshevik revolution had brought about a tectonic shift in the pace of life, the mode of education, as well as in the cultural postulates within this traditional Oriental milieu. Tajikistan was separated from Uzbekistan in 1929, primarily because of the country's Persianate linguistic distinctiveness. On the occasion of the creation of the Tajik SSR, Stalin referred to the country as its people as the toilers at the gates of Hindustan. Now, irrespective of her position within the internal power equation of the USSR and despite her diminutive geographical size and in substantial military capability, Tajikistan nevertheless was accepted as an integral component of the Soviet socialist superpower. Now, this ideological and material transformation that Tajikistan underwent had some incidental ramifications on the perspective towards India as well. It has all transpired when Soviet Tajik poet Mirza Tursunzoda came to visit India. Incidentally, he visited India, I think in 1947, but before India got independence, probably in March 47. And he belonged to this post-Second World War literary tradition and had written quite a few poems, around 30 poems on India itself during his visit, which all, I think, awaits translation into any of Indian languages as yet. Of them, the most significant poems are Gang, which is about River Ganga, and Tara Chandiri, and as well as Indian Ballad, which are his own adaptation of Pomdeva Madan in a very strange and interesting way. So first, this is from two clips from Tursunzoda's house museum itself. He had been felicitated by our then Prime Minister as well. So about this poem, Gang, what is interesting is that instead of employing common euphemism of romanticism over its eternal presence as a Holy Spirit flowing through the center of the subcontinent, this poem had a distinctive approach which sought to emphasize with the seamless sorrow and sufferings silently carried down by the river. To the poet, this sorrow was actually the reflection of the people's suffering perpetuated by exploitation and injustice. The sense of sadness associated with the river was imagined against the backdrop of the suffering of the masses. Thereby, the composition in its most pristine interpretation was blended in socialist fervor along with poetic imagination. There is a strange similarity of this composition with a very common song sung by an Assamese, very famous Assamese singer, Bhupen Hazarika, Bistirno Dupare, Ganga Boicho Kano, and which is usually compared with Olman River of Paul Robeson. But definitely Tursunzoda had no exposure to either of the two, but the composition is of this contemporary time. That's very, very interesting. The next slide, this slide is showing the composition of Tara Chanderi, one in Russian, the other in Tajik. And now this is very, very interesting that Tara Chanderi is a dancer, Indian dancer whom Tursunzoda met in his visit. And he imagined himself, recreated in his imagination a Komdeva Madan where he played the role of Madan while Tara Chanderi as his Komde. And that reflects in his poem where he is bringing, rather fusing both Hafiz and Bedil together. Like, I just read a little. All lovers by Hafiz were loved as if each were his dearest friend. Oh, beauty spot upon your brow, for beauty's mark I'll give as thanks, Samarkand and Bukhara. Oh, you Hindu and you Tajik, two hearts like candles shedding light, Bedil by fire was seared. This is from Bedil's couplet that says, Dili Tajiki Hindu Chundo Shami Anjuma Nafruat, Badogi Undo Shami Anjuma Nafroz Bedil Shud. So, now the image, we have also a real life image of Tara Chandari in the House Museum of Tursunzoda. The image of this graceful dancer in her intricate costume, in an elegant poise, is in display at the Residential Museum of Tursunzoda in Dushanbe. However, in India, this name does not feature anywhere. In the annals of our cultural history, I tried to probe a little through the famous dance use in and around, yet I didn't find any clue. And it remains even unknown to the stalwarts in the field. The dancer, like many others, had joined the long list of forgotten legends in her home country. While in the mindscape of Tajik intellectuals, Tara Chandari remains a celebrated Indian figure, venerated for her elegant demeanor, which was likened to that of Komde. Now, this rich legacy of Tursunzoda can be taken as a stepping stone, facilitating a serious literary evaluation of Indo-Tajik cultural relations. In fact, his work can be viewed as a common element straddling the pre-Soviet past with the post-Soviet present, so far as the Tajik literary quest for India is concerned. And there is another segment of my paper. Can I continue? Is there time for 3-4 minutes? Sir, can I continue for another 3-4 minutes?
Yes, sure.
Thank you. So this brings us to the point of translation as a completely different area or arena of literary interactions. This is an avenue to access Indian literature in Tajik language. The vice versa did not happen much as yet. So access to the comprehension of the literary tradition of one culture by another depends on the very necessary and technical process of translation. In fact, this trend can be traced back to the pre-modern Persian world when Rajamnama, that is Mahabharata, had been translated to Persian. But that legacy continued even under the Soviet era when the Department of Indology had been established and very serious efforts had been made to translate Indian literature. And this is the time you find Ramayana, Mahabharata, and lots of, famous Indian writings, starting from Rabindranath to Premchand, being translated. And you find a percolation of it even in the post-Soviet era. I found this Ramayana, which has been translated by Baba Hoji in Tajiki, and this is meant for the children in small couplets. And this was actually a gift by the daughter of Baba Hoji to me. Anyway, so however, this Tajik literary history began to show signs of a renewed interest in Indian literature in the post-Soviet era. And there you find a team of scholars here. This person with flower in hand, Professor Rajabov, and here Professor Zarina, they are working in this Tajik National University, and they contribute largely in the contemporary effort of translation work, largely. In fact, Zarina has translated Rabindranath's Kabuliwala. Rajabov did huge work on Rabindranath and Premchand and so on and so forth. So this work is on that side. But let us also remember that Soviet era was also a period of us, Indian side, getting a very good, exposure to literature created before and during the Soviet era of that region. Though overwhelmingly Russian, yet we had exposure to some of the finest Central Asian literary geniuses of the time as well. I can mention Aytmatov, Chingiz Aytmatov from Kyrgyzstan. And I can mention about Sadruddin Aini in case of Tajikistan. There was Abdullah Kahar's writing, and these are not only they were translated into English, they had been translated. I found it in my own regional language. They were in Bengali, I could read them in my own mother tongue. This was a trend that was part of a propaganda policy, definitely, but that had created an infrastructure, that had created a tradition, which I think we should, it's a time that we can bring it back and we can carry forward. I would stop here. Only two, video clips that I would like to show you. Can I get, where's this person? Would you, brother, can you come back and help me to get it in that earlier mode? In this mode, videos don't open. It will take a few seconds, actually. And there I will stop. Video. So I'll come back. Okay. It will open. Do you have this? If you have, then it will open. So this is the same couplet of Hafiz, iterated in the form of classical music of the region. The compilation was by Smithsonian's. And this is a small from the Somdeva Madan opera. So I would like to stop here. I would love to get. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Nandini Bhattacharya. But we have last speaker in the list, Dinora Azimova, Professor Dinora Azimova. She will make her report online. Previously, there was some problems. There were some problems with, and maybe still till now. And we should wait a little bit, but I think the previous report was very interesting, especially about Persian legacy to India, and not only to India and the other world. And it was very interesting, certainly. And in Soviet times, certainly we did many translations in Hindi and from Hindi and from Urdu or something like that. But unfortunately, during after the collapse of Soviet Union, this work practically stopped. But nevertheless, for example, in Kyrgyzstan, we translated part of Mahabharata into Kyrgyz language, And part of our Kyrgyz epic Manas was translated in Hindi language. Yeah. Идет процедура соединения. Вот. И также, например, наш киргиз в свое советское время работал. Now, our Kyrgyz person in Soviet times, he worked in Soviet embassy here in Delhi, and he was a poet, and he wrote many poems about India and Delhi in Kyrgyz language. Adilbayev. But he was a diplomat. His main position was diplomat. But nevertheless, he managed to wrote many good poems on India.
They should be accessible to us. We don't even know fully. That was my argument entirely.
It's also because I think Professor Evgeny's in Kazakhstan also we have Mahabharata Ramayana translated into Kazakh language, and as well as Hindi Kazakh dictionary has been elaborated. But this is also the point which yesterday was taken at the inaugural address by, I think, ICCR president, that like, for example, Bollywood films should be subtitled into the local languages, is same way as, for example, if in India you may have a possibility to read in the local languages, because it is like in Kazakh, in Kyrgyz. So this is how the evolving trend is, I think, in cultural field now takes place.
We have a little bit of, with our online guest. Unfortunately, she's in an area in Afghanistan where the electricity is playing truant. So she's trying her best to log on. So I would ask Dr. Banerjee to please take over in some way in case she does manage to log on. So Dr. Denora will definitely log on. So as soon as she logs on, we'll be able to see her on screen. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks to Professor Nirmala Joshi for having me here. Thank you, Chair. And it was lovely to listen to both these beautiful ladies who spoke about Central Asia. As a comparatist, as a student of Vishwabharati Shantiniketan, I was listening very intently to both the presentations, and I was thinking that there is an underlying angst in both the presentation. The angst about reaching out and being as one. Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore in 1917 wrote in his book Sadhana that history is nothing but history of man. And here we were talking about two nations. We were talking about Tajikistan and we were talking about Kazakhstan. Personally, I come from Uzbekistan. I am settled at Tashkent right now, and my heart beats for Uzbekistan. So first, let me try to engage in joining the threads together. We all are stitched in a tapestry right here in this auditorium. Professor Laura was delving and trying to engage with symbols. And Professor Nandini, she spoke about literature, dance, and other textual arts. Now, Professor Laura was looking at culture through 1, 2, 3, institutional, relational, and cognitive identities or understandings or engagements. And she was trying to help us understand how in Central Asia we try to make meanings with relational understanding or socialization. Socialization could be pro-social behavior or anti-social behavior, but we still try to make meaning out of small details of culture. Institutional, she was talking just before our panel, we had a discussion on ICT and ICT tools and how we should handle security and also how to control the meta narrative. Being a disciple of Derrida and Foucault, I was just thinking that it is very difficult to control a narrative. It's, it has this tendency to move beyond a framework. And howsoever you try to control a narrative, it will spill out of the borders. And perhaps there'll never be a 100% foolproof, bulletproof guarantee of controlling a narrative. It will shift. And perhaps we will also shift with that narrative. And then we were talking about relational narrative, where she was talking about socializations and how, civilization turns into a reservoir of knowledge. This knowledge, she was speaking about oral, written, and visual, and how it has to be contextualized. Whether we are speaking about traditional knowledges or knowledge systems now being embedded into the modern science and symbology. She spoke about the Kazakh flag. Recently, I'd gone for a trip to Almaty. And my experiences, I was just thinking about the symbolism she was speaking about. And I saw that there were big horses everywhere in Almaty. And then we went out to eat. And the first dish we tried was besh barmak. And trust me, it tasted good. It tasted like mutton, albeit a little salty, but it tasted good. Now, she was talking about structures collapsing and, the panopticonic, the influence of Soviet Russia slowly, dying off. I want to share with my audience today, albeit I have a very sparse audience, but my own experience in the classroom. So I teach English, comparative literature, and I was in a classroom where I was trying to introduce a short story. And one of my students, very politely raised his hand. I said, yes. So he goes, teacher, why don't we look at stories by our own Uzbek writers? Why don't you are a woman? Why don't we look at Zulfia Khanum? Why are we reading only about these people, people who actually dominated us for such a long time? Let us open our doors. And that was an eye opener for me. Structures will collapse. It is inevitable part of a culture. The panel that we are here sitting and discussing so, deeply upon. Structures are never forever things. They all have shelf values, shelf lives. And they are a part of the nation building process. From here, I will move on to Nandini, and as she was talking about literature. So again, talking about comparative literature, talking about what I learned as a scholar in Vishwabharati Shantiniketan, that literature is not only text; it is the way things are, put into perspective. And a text cannot be read only from a point of history. It cannot be read only through a theme. It moves and sort of makes a way around, like a stream, moving stream. And this situating books and texts around a date, a time, a chronology is very difficult because these things overlap. She was speaking about Ganga. And I was thinking about the Ganga Mall that we have in Uzbekistan, and the way text moves beyond its spaces to a paratextual space is very interesting. So my experiences of Uzbekistan as an Indian has taught me that it is not geography or the idea, the word, the nomenclature, Central Asia that sort of hedges me. Perhaps I'm a citizen, I'm a human being, and the education that I received taught me more to be a human than a particular resident of a particular country. So Swami Vivekananda had told that we all look at history. We try to, sort of belong to history by showing threads of connection. Now, he gave an example that Europeans do it by, attaching themselves to the idea of some baron, some, filthy rich baron who was a thief but has made huge walls and stays very protected inside. Whereas the Indian Rajas, they, make a linkage with history by connecting themselves to some long forgotten sage in a forest. We all look at history, we all draw lines. And this history is not same. This history is also the horizon of expectation by which we read history, and it changes, it is fluid, and by which we, try to situate ourselves in the point of time. So I think I spoke for some time. I need to share a very interesting incident of Uzbekistan. So whenever I travel by Yandex, that is the cab that I use, most of the time I'm asked, Hindustan, Uzbekistan, dostalar. And then also that they ask me, do you know how to make laddu? Because they watch a lot of Hindi movies. And for them, the quintessential Hindu woman is the woman who makes laddus. So I tell them, yes, I do know how to make laddus, but I also know how to teach. And then as soon as they know that I'm a teacher, Oktuj, professor, ustad, the shift happens. And it's a beautiful shift. Sir, sitting right there, he was speaking about, how it is a very open, very beautiful country where it is very modern. It is also traditional in its ways. As an English teacher, one day I was trying to explain them the meaning of conscientiousness. This is a big word for a student of English second language. So after some time, a student told me, that means conscientious worker is a worker who does halal work, whereas a non-conscientious worker is the worker who is into haram. I said yes. So this is how Uzbekistan, or perhaps these other countries with whom I don't have or limited experience, is the way these countries think. It is not about a radical Muslim mindset, but it is very open, very accepting, and it has given me the space to grow to the extent that I like being called Supriya Khanum. Thank you. Rahmat.
Thank you, Dr. Banerjee. And in conclusion, I would like to say that certainly now, even now, we may see the results of India Central Asia cultural cooperation. With the establishment of Mughal rule in India, there was invented new type of archaeology, India Muslim archaeology. And you may see most monuments of this here in Delhi. And that's why cultural relations certainly will develop. And I may say that last year it was first high-level meeting India +5. Narendra Modi invited Central Asian presidents, and it was an online regime, and they decided to establish some book line named India Central Asia Library. And that's why maybe publishing this, we resume publishing work. Some our authors will be published in India, and Indian authors will be published in our countries. And finally, I may say that in Hindi, some words, Bharat Central Asia Maitri Amar Rahe.
Thank you very much, Excellency Kablukov. Just a brief update. Professor Dedora and me were trying to connect online. So unfortunately, the electricity is playing truant. She did get a few minutes of electricity, but then it dropped off again. So as graciously as she has been attempting on the other side, tomorrow afternoon in the special session from 4 to 5 o'clock, we will try and get her online again. And she's going to send us our paper. So if we cannot get her online, we will certainly read it online for her so that we can share what she has expressed. And what she very briefly saw was the wonderful dais out here with her name on it. So she said, well, I was really happy about that. So, but unfortunately, certain things are out of our hand. So in conclusion, we have a little memento for all of our guests here on the dais. So the first one, Professor Laura. Dr. Nandini Bhattacharya. Dr. Supriya. Senor Kablikov. Excellency Kablikov, please. Yes. And for Dr. Supriya. And with this, we come to the first day's conclusion. And tomorrow morning, we hope to see you all back at 10 o'clock. Thank you very much.